The problem with the Legally Blonde prequel series. In 2001, Reese Witherspoon strutted around a courtroom in hot pink and taught us all the cardinal rule of perm maintenance. 25 years later, and Legally Blonde has since transcended its genre, spawning a sequel, a spin-off, a Broadway musical, and now a prequel series. As a fan of the original movie and all things girly, I of course watched it, and today I'm going to be talking about what I did and didn't like about Elle, including the story, the characters, and the fashion. Let's get into it. Taking place in 1995, the series begins on the 16th birthday of Elle Woods, a popular Bel Air high schooler who is meticulously planning her junior year. Everything seems to be going perfectly until her plastic surgeon father botches an up-and-coming star's nose job, and in order to avoid a lawsuit, the family relocates to Seattle. Elle's blonde blowout and penchant for pink sticks out like a sore thumb against her classmates' flannel shirts, and try as she might, she just can't seem to make any friends. She only becomes more of a social pariah after accidentally getting the school secretary, Donna, fired, and Elle makes it her mission to get Donna her job back. These efforts spiral into other hijinks, including the discovery of an actual conspiracy at the school that inadvertently leads to the death of a classmate's mother. During all of this, Elle's personal life goes through its fair share of ups and downs, making new friends, learning more about herself, and even finding love. As you can probably tell, the plot is nothing we haven't seen before, reminding me a good deal of Bring It On All or Nothing, with a dash of Mean Girls, Nancy Drew, and Wild Child. In fact, there are several scenes that seem like purposeful callbacks to other teen films and chick flicks, like Elle being told about the different cliques on her first day of school, or an entire episode dedicated to The Breakfast Club. Because of these references, the series is never able to escape from the comparisons to other works, and more often than not, it falls short. I don't like most prequels on principle, since they rarely introduce real stakes and tend to undermine the protagonist's journey in the original film, which is definitely the case for Elle. We already know where she winds up in her 20s, and by repeating the exact same story beats as Legally Blonde but a decade earlier, it makes us wonder why she'd be so out of sorts at Harvard if she already had experience as a fish out of water in Seattle. Honestly, instead of trying to default to more of a serious teen drama, Elle was begging to be a breezy half-hour sitcom, something more similar to the Clueless TV series or Lizzie McGuire. We'd meet familiar faces in addition to new ones, and see how Elle deals with different teenage experiences, like sneaking out of the house, getting a part-time job, or her first kiss. But at least unlike some other recent TV shows based on beloved franchises like Gossip Girl, Bel Air, or Cruel Intentions, Elle doesn't try to go in a dark, gritty direction. It stays true to the PG-13 spirit of the original. No one is swearing every minute, no one is addicted to drugs, and no one is sleeping with their teacher. It's good, wholesome fun. Where the show gets a lot of points from me is the school corruption subplot. At first it feels like it's just there to introduce drama and give Elle and her friends something to do, but the way they've tied it into almost every aspect of the overarching story is really well done. And the scene where Elle is questioning the mayoral candidates creates great narrative symmetry to the Legally Blonde movies. However, the pacing of the overall series is a little off, with a bunch of plot lines getting introduced and then dropped and then brought back. I don't really love the whole Cosmopolitan magazine internship plotline. I understand why it's there, to serve as a reason for Elle to return to Bel Air and solidify the character's love for fashion, but it doesn't have much of a payoff. And having all of her friends get mad at her for writing an article about how mean they were to her initially just feels really forced. Honestly, I found my enjoyment of the series completely dependent on which subplots were being focused on. So the first few episodes were kinda generic since it's just about Elle being disliked. Then it picks up steam halfway through when she and her friends start getting into hijinks. But then the final episode is a low note since they're just wrapping everything up. In the original film, Elle's parents are new money caricatures intended to highlight the superficial world that she grew up in. The series switches things up a bit by fleshing out her mother's character, making her a touch more grounded and well-intentioned. Their mother-daughter relationship is actually one of the highlights of the early episodes. Eva's the one who adopts Bruiser, she decorates Elle's room to make her feel at home in Seattle, and she gives Elle the much-needed support she needs when she's struggling at school. The only trade-off is that it makes Elle's dad look like a comically bad parent in comparison, to the point that I almost feel like they'd have been better off not including him at all, or doing some funny gag where we never see his face to drive home how much of an absent father he is. My favorite adult character is definitely Donna, though, who proves that you can be kind but not a pushover, and I loved the running gag of her having a different job every single episode. In some ways, she reminded me a bit of Mr. Turner in Boy Meets World, being a similar down-to-earth but wise mentor. I also really appreciated their inclusion of James Vanderbeek, who was a staple of 90s media thanks to Dawson's Creek. Elle was his final role before passing away from colorectal cancer, and it was fun to have him as a twist villain when he'd been playing such a nice and unassuming guy the whole time. Although I will admit that the role doesn't hold a candle to his time on Don't Trust the Bee in Apartment 23, which I highly recommend. The highlight of the series is hands down Lexi Minry as Elle, who is utterly adorable. Admittedly, her take on the character reminds me less of Reese Witherspoon's version of Elle and more of a Cher Horowitz dupe, but that isn't a terrible thing considering the character is supposed to be almost a decade younger. Elle is naively optimistic and incredibly chipper, and while that could have easily turned her into a one-note Mary Sue, it's balanced by her insecurities and failures. Everything doesn't work out the way that she wants it to, at least not at first. Part of the character's charm is her earnestness, a trait she retains even as an adult, and you can definitely see this version of Elle growing into the confident young woman who takes on Congress. The teenage characters slot into predictable stereotypes. Miles is the jock, Kimberly is the mean queen bee, Liz is the angsty loner, Dustin is the rebel with a cause, and Elle, of course, is the blonde bimbo. The main message of the series is that there's more to them than meets the eye, and you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but the way they get there feels forced. Everyone, even the teachers, treat her terribly, when the entire time she's just doing her best. Sure, she gets Donna fired, but honestly, none of the kids actually cared about that. And you mean to tell me that not a single hormonal teen boy tried to get into her pants? I don't buy it. Like most teen dramas, there's of course a love triangle, and I think both Miles and Dustin work for that purpose. I was Team Dustin early on, although I don't think he should have been British, and I was glad to see his and Elle's relationship build slowly from enemies to friends to crushes. Miles is the less interesting choice, but you completely understand why Elle would have fallen for him, and I respect that the show actually had the foresight to have him and his girlfriend break up before their relationship progressed into outright cheating. Also, does Miles look like a Glenn Powell knockoff to anyone else, or is that just me? All in all, I wasn't as invested in the romantic plotlines as I should have been, in part because I think there were more interesting things in Elle's life that they could have explored, but also because we already know she's going to break up with them and date Warner in college, and I actually wouldn't be surprised if he appears in the second season. My favorite of the new teen characters is Elle's long-distance best friend, Madison. Initially, you think she's just another blonde bimbo, but her character has a sort of self-assuredness and emotional intelligence that is actually really captivating. You get why she and Elle are friends, but they aren't clones of each other. And I think having her and Dustin hook up, but neither taking it seriously, is very true to the teenage experience. I found Kimberly a bit annoying, going on and on about posers when I'd argue that she herself is one, but I liked the twist of making her closeted, since it highlighted the reality for many teenagers in the 90s. Liz's experience, on the other hand, is a total fantasy. Don't get me wrong, it's nice seeing a queer character who isn't being shoved into lockers or being called slurs, but it does feel a little disingenuous at times. I totally believe that Donna and Elle would be accepting of her sexuality, but you mean to tell me that the other kids at school aren't constantly giving her a hard time? Sure, she's a loner, but it comes across more like her own choice and less like the character is an outcast. I have the same feelings about Miles' circumstances as well. Having two dads would have been incredibly rare in the 1990s, with the media and society at large often painting same-sex parents in a negative light. I just don't think that a girl wearing pink would have been the biggest talking point at that school. But I get it, that's a heavy topic to try and address, and the Legally Blonde prequel probably isn't the place to do it. There are a handful of things that make the world of Elle feel very small and lacking in realism. The main one that stood out to me were the amount of times the characters just randomly bump into each other. Seattle isn't a small town, and I just found it tough to believe that everyone was going to the same coffee shops and concerts. But I did get a kick out of the various Seattle staples like Pike Place, and having Elle basically invent the Starbucks Frappuccino was a fun, silly moment. The costume design also made it tough for me to buy into their world, looking nothing like what teenagers in the mid-90s would have been wearing. Sure, the joke is that Seattle is grungy, so Elle's hyper-feminine style sticks out, but there's absolutely no variation from student to student. It just looks like everything was bought in bulk off of Amazon, with every flannel being the same muted shade of gray, and the combat boots looking ridiculously cheap. Everyone is in Kurt Cobain cosplay, but you're telling me not a single girl at school went the Courtney Love kinder whore route? Not even Shannon, a self-proclaimed fashionista? And considering Elle spent an entire day observing what everyone around her was wearing, I don't buy that she'd think bedazzling a Nirvana shirt and pairing it with neon pink pleather to try to make people like her would happen. She's not an idiot. Elle's wardrobe was probably one of the biggest missteps in the entire series for me. There's a bit of overlap with Clueless in regard to silhouette and color palette, but as Clueless's costume designer has said multiple times, she was creating a deliberately anachronistic version of 90s teen fashion. Elle could have looked at other contemporaneous shows like Beverly Hills 90210, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Sweet Valley High, Seventh Heaven, or Party of Five for an actual idea of what teenagers were wearing in that decade. The main reason Elle's clothing looks strange is because everything she's wearing is clearly from this time period. I get that thrift stores aren't the gold mine they used to be, but surely someone on the production should have realized how out of place all of her clothing looked. It's all made out of stretchy polyester without a stitch of tailoring, the antithesis of 90s fashion. And several pieces were even micro-trends from the last few years, which I just couldn't wrap my head around. To try and make the series seem more high-end, they stick Elle in a lot of Chanel, but it reads as far too preppy and old money for a girl who is canonically new money through and through. Think Jimmy Choo, Dolce, Versace, not tweed suit sets. That said, there are a couple of genuinely fun fashion Easter eggs buried in the show. There's a reference to Marc Jacobs' infamous grunge collection for Perry Ellis, as well as a nod to Elizabeth Hurley's safety pin Versace dress. But I just wish that more thought went into the overall look of the show. And not just the clothing, but the cinematography as well, which has this weirdly warm but desaturated filter that makes everything look cheap. Honestly, I think there was a stronger version of this show buried underneath all of the corporate nostalgia. Change the wardrobe, up the saturation, and lean into the comedy. I almost wish that they'd made Elle a genuine mean girl at the start, a vicious, vapid queen bee, before Seattle strips away her status and forces her to reckon with her own personality. Then you arrive at the same sweet, empathetic Elle we get in the films, except now her compassion for the cruel people around her actually means something, because she remembers what it felt like to be one of them. Elle has already been renewed for a second season. Do you think you'll be tuning in? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!